Jesus.
Hi, I'm Virginia LaRue, and I'm doing these interviews with the pioneers and founders of the Friends of Calligraphy. And I think it's fitting that Georgianna and I are very close to where the first meeting started, which was at her home. And
Upstairs.
yes, upstairs in her home.
Upstairs.
And when I first met these illustrious lettering artists, I was teaching with the San Francisco School District, and I began taking classes with all of you. First with Georgianna, and later with Thomas, and Sumner did workshops. And so I felt this was a good place to start to look back, and we're here 50 years later, and
Yes,
I felt like that was
Yeah, that was kind of shocking.
yeah.
and the Renaissance happening there, because all of you really elevated the calligraphy and writing to an art form. And so I wanted to really catch some of the memories of how that all began for you. And so please chime in as the thoughts come, when your memories of the beginning of your love for the art form and your ending up your career in calligraphy. So,
Okay.
Sumner, you want to
Sure.
start?
Well, my career in calligraphy, I really started my awareness of calligraphy. Really started because of going to Reed College as a freshman. I took a class from Lloyd Reynolds in art history. It was a big class. It met, I think, at 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And it was given in the chapel at Reed. Yeah, it was given in the chapel at Reed College, and Lloyd would lecture and show. I remember that he showed this frieze which depicted a lioness. I think he spent 2 lectures on this lioness. It was an Assyrian sculpture inscription. Anyway, and then I took that class for 1 semester, and that what turned out to be the same year that he brought Edward Kadich, Father Edward Kadich, to Reed College in order to inscribe the name of each dorm, each building. Initially, it was only the old buildings, first old buildings at Reed College, of which there were only, I guess, 3. There was the dorm, there was the main building, there was a dorm, and then there was another dorm. Anyway, and that was my first real experience of, this whole world. And I have actually a picture which somebody took of standing and watching Father Kadich inscribe Eliot Hall in place on scaffolding. He was up there chiseling away because he was basically a blank sort of space where he could do such a thing. And then I remember following him around while he was a group of us actually followed him around while he was inscribing the names of the other buildings. Anyway, that was my introduction to the whole thing. And then, of course, when I finally graduated, I had a lot of friends who had taken Reynolds' class in calligraphy and who were doing calligraphy. One of them was one of my roommate's girlfriends at one time. So I had some, association with it, but I didn't really start studying until I lived in Portland for a couple of years after I graduated. And I took the last class that Lloyd taught at Reed College during the summer. And Robert Palladino, who replaced him as a teacher, was also teaching the class, but I realized very quickly that Robert Palladino, this was a class for Robert Palladino as well as for us, because Bob didn't really get to say very much. He mostly, I think, absorbed the way Lloyd taught the class. But anyway, that was my beginnings, was Lloyd Reynolds at Reed College, and I don't know how far you want me to go. I would take
I
up the
was
whole
I was
hour if I
thinking
told you
maybe
my whole
Georgiana,
story.
does that jog any memories of you
Well,
and
all
Lloyd?
I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking as Sumner was talking was
Uh-huh.
that anyone who got to see Lloyd make letters was blessed. That is because you saw a great master. And you know, it's not in how you talk. I really, he was the whole package. Because he was a very, very serious, but also fun loving, but he was deadly serious about lettering. You didn't mess with him in regard to lettering. Isn't that right, Sumner? I mean, he was,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
yeah,
No, he was a wonderful teacher also. He had a big
that's true.
a door which was on propped up at the in the front of the classroom, and butcher paper, and then he would write on this board. He would demonstrate on the butcher paper on the door, and it was very effective. You got to see him actually make letters
Yeah,
from the very first
right,
day.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's
and
nothing
it was pretty impressive, you know, that I think, and I adopted, when I started teaching, I did the same thing. I did put up the butcher paper and started, you know, and
Yeah.
demonstrated,
Yeah.
and using Coit's pens and so on. And that was my beginning in calligraphy, and it was the last time that he taught a class at Reed College. I just barely made it to study with him.
Well,
He did teach some other classes. He also taught at the Art Institute in Portland. He taught classes there as well, which he had done for a number of years, and he kept doing that. But this was the last one that he taught actually at Reed.
well, you were lucky to get to see him because
No kidding.
yeah, because you know, it's one thing to see the letters, and it's another to see somebody making them and talking about them. And
Indeed.
it was astonishing. He was really amazing. And I think people who taught after him, students who then taught, you know, tried to do the same thing. I mean, I did, you know, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, me
Do it
too.
the way he did it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you got them on so many levels. You got them on the level where you demonstrate, and then you got them on a level where you're breathing over their shoulder, you know. So
Yeah, exactly. And I was just remembering, you know, an incident where he came up, I was writing, he picked the pen out of my hand, wrote a few letters, and then gave the pen back to me. And I swear to God, the pen wrote better after that.
Yes. That's right.
And I knew there was some magic involved
Yeah.
at that point.
Very, very powerful man. Very powerful.
Yeah.
And a very, I mean, he was a combination of intimidating and not intimidating.
Yeah,
Because
and encouraging.
so personal. It was personal and kind of whispery in your ear, you know. And then terrifying, really. I mean, I think there's something about when if you did it, you know, like shortly after he did it, it was as though he inhabited your hand, body, you know, eye, whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
got an extra lift from that. That was, but I think that's true in general for a teacher to demonstrate. It makes a huge difference to demonstrate at the place where the student is. It's a lot different.
Yeah.
Demonstrating
Yeah.
far away, because
Yeah.
right there, it's the same size that you're going to do it. You know, it's like it takes away the idea that it's magic. I mean, it is magic, but you know, it makes it more.
Well, it sort of imparts to you the magic, you know, and that's what that does. And some of the magic gets transferred
right.
to you by his
That's
physical
right.
presence. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
he would hold your hand. He would actually hold your hand and move it. And that was amazing.
That was amazing. I'd say that was when he was really desperate.
Yeah.
Get the message.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I would like that.
Anyway.
Yeah. I'm a control person.
Anyway, he was quite a remarkable teacher and launched both you and I on our careers.
Yep.
Thomas,
Good morning.
may we hear from you?
Yes, along with your discussion about people demonstrating, the first person I saw demonstrating was Georgiana, and I was always amazed.
Ah.
Yeah. My introduction to calligraphy was really quite accidental. I was a landscape architect, started a new business, and we had an employee who did drafting with us, and we had no work. So one day we were sitting around, and I had a catalog for Berkeley Arts and Crafts Co-op or something like that, and they had little classes that were described, and so we were reading through this, and there was tie-dye, and I think pottery, and then there was this thing called calligraphy. And so I was reading calligraphy, and I thought, oh, I think maybe I could do that, because landscape architects and architects try to learn a specialized printing. And the teacher was David Goins. So the two of us just signed up for a 4-week class with David. And in 4 weeks, he taught his italic and kind of a humanist hand. And they were both from his actually quite nicely printed books. They were quite beautiful. I don't know. I think David's calligraphy he learned from his mother, is what I recollect. It wasn't the it certainly didn't stand up to any standard that I learned later, but it was very good. He had a very confident hand, and most of all, I just enjoyed David as a person so much, and we became pretty good friends. I stopped by frequently at his studio, and no matter what he was working on, he would stop and get us a cup of coffee and talk about Berkeley politics. So for a person who was from the Midwest, conservative world, to hear from a person who was the kind of one of the experts on the free speech movement at Berkeley, it was a great education. But at the end of the class, David suggested that I maybe make a book, and because he had someone in his studio who he said would help me. And he said also, you should learn some capital letters or something like that. That was for him, the two hands and capital letters, that was calligraphy. That was it. After you know those, you've got it all. And I think I did a book, and I looked at Marie Angel's, some capital letters of hers. But that led me back to my business partner's mother was a bookbinder, Stella Patri, and I had gotten to know her through some of the Patri parties, which were infamous at that time. And I asked Tito, who was my partner, if Stella would teach me bookbinding, and he says, "Well, she doesn't really like students," but she agreed to teach me. And so for about I think 6 weeks, I went to Stella's every Saturday, and we made a book. And over the next 30 years, Stella and I were, it was kind of like a Harold and Maude relationship. After the classes, I would take her to shopping at Safeway. And anyway, we saw each other every year for over 30 years, every week for 30 years. But she was the one who at some point did get tired of me as a student and told me about, she says, there's this English guy teaching calligraphy at Santa Cruz, and this was Donald Jackson. So that's how I found out about Donald, and Donald obviously became a important teacher for me. So David was sort of my introduction, an introduction to books. And Donald certainly was important in the craft and giving me a sense of what good lettering was. So there were many other people. There were other people too, but I don't know how much you want to hear or how much I should talk. So
we can get back to some of the impactful workshop teachers, because the Friends formed, we started having access to teachers from all over the world. So I think that having this organization, so kind of going back to the Friends of Calligraphy organization, maybe just some of your thoughts of how this all started. I know Georgianna started on a social gathering. Her idea was to have this picnic of all of people who love letters, whether they were lettering artists, bookbinders, anyone, print people, anyone who loved letters were invited to a picnic. So maybe that was kind of the first informal gathering of letter lovers.
That's
Georgie,
right.
do you
So
remember
I was
that
thinking
picnic?
about yeah, all of this history, just, because of our getting together today. And I think that Donald Jackson played a big part in the whole thing. Donald Jackson, basically everywhere he went, he got people to get organized, and that all these calligraphy groups that have existed for all this time. Well, San Francisco's is, the Bay Area's is one of the oldest ones, but Donald Jackson was the motivator. He said, start a group, start a group, start a group. The model, of course, was the Society for Scribes and Illuminators in England. But the conversation that I remember from our first getting together as a group to start the Friends of Calligraphy was about, should we have an organization which is like the SSI, which is basically for people who are already, craftsmen, or should we have a more open sort of, friendly, which would admit people who were just learning, or just interested in calligraphy, and that's the way it came out. That's how
Yeah, no
the
test,
name
no
Friends.
no testing.
Yeah, yeah,
Just,
yeah.
yeah, all you have to do is like it. You don't even have to
All
like
you
it.
have to do is like it. Yeah.
There you
So yeah, so that was, and that took place in Georgiana's living room and other places, and but that's the way it came out. Yeah.
seems like there was a lot of discussion, and I was trying to remember who
There was Arnie.
who was there really were sort of two sides to it, and I can't remember who was on the side of it being more professional. Yeah, I was trying to
Well,
think.
one of the problems
Pardon?
was there weren't very many people who were professional
Right, yeah.
calligraphers at that point in our area. There just weren't many, to start an organization. People finally, I think, came to the conclusion that kind of would maybe be, a living room full of people, and that would be it.
A small group.
And so, yeah. So I think wisely the decision was to make it a more open group. So that's what happened.
One of my memories, though, is that somehow it seemed like we were never going to quite come up with a name. And my feeling was if it hadn't been for Sumner and Arn Wolf, we might still be there. They seemed to cut through everything and kind of got us back grounded oftentimes. So
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
it-
Arnie was good at that.
Aaron was very good
he
at that.
he
yeah.
was,
He was good at, he,
well, he himself was a teacher, and he was, he knew how to handle those kinds of situations.
well, I think that Arnie was a strong person, but he was
Yeah.
strong without making others feel weak. So that's a good person to have in a
Yeah.
situation
Yeah.
because you get more input that way,
Yeah.
more equal kind of,
Yeah,
more people willing to stand up and say something.
Yeah.
And he
I
was
think he could.
Arnie was really a friendly fellow, you know.
Yeah.
He didn't
yeah,
have big investment in calligraphy being something or other. I don't think. I mean, not
Yeah.
not in a way that would inhibit people from joining, maybe just
Yeah.
from feeling
Yeah.
like they didn't have a right
very
to.
open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he definitely had enough experience with both sort of sides of the idea of beginning and also professional. So I think he seemed always to have that kind of history or background that enabled him to comment on almost anything, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was also a very sociable person.
Yeah.
By nature.
Yeah,
So that was
Yeah.
a very nice element to have in a
Yeah.
beginning group like that. So that is, the friendly part was as important as the
Yeah.
writing part. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah. And Arnie was not one to restrict, was he? No.
no,
He's a friendly fellow. Fortunately,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because that was an issue, a question, whether this would be a group that was, you could get into it by showing what you could do, and you would have to be able to do something good to
Yeah.
get. And Arnie, fortunately, was more for friendliness than skill. Not that he, would object to skill at all. He's in favor of skill, but he was by nature a friendly fellow, I think.
Yeah.
So thank goodness,
Yes, indeed.
because that means that people aren't intimidated, which is very important in a situation like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Because people would be
Yeah.
intimidated in spite of everything you do,
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
even with friendly stuff in the title,
Yeah, right in the title. Where should we go from here, Virginia?
Okay. So I'm going to take it to all of you committed to a profession of calligraphy. And how did you decide to make a living from it? I mean, I know with Thomas, eventually you decided to leave your landscape architecture business to pursue calligraphy. And how did you pay rent? How did you, make it so that it would work for you as a profession? Because, this started as, for a lot of people, a hobby, we would do it on the side, but for, I think, all three of you, you made it a profession and lifted the art of calligraphy from lettering to a wonderful art, a profession. So I'm going to start with Thomas, because I remember taking classes from you and, remember you talking about commission work from Harrison and making your books, and, you were creating.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long time ago. And so maybe people have forgotten, but in the 70s, it didn't cost very much to live in San Francisco. I remember my bank
Yeah, the good
account
old
at
days.
the end of a year, I think And when I would fill out my taxes, maybe $6,000 was covered a whole year or something. So it was actually it was kind of a crazy time in a way. As my parents reminded me, you've gone to college for 12 years and you're doing what? um, but it really was, I could, a person could work at kind of any sort of little job and for 2 days a week and have the rest of the time free to do what you wanted. So it was fortunately an easy time to make that kind of jump from a profession to calligraphy, which certainly was no guarantee that one could make a living out of it. I think I taught early on, and what was it? I think we did the Renaissance Fair. I mean, all kinds of little things just to make enough money to pay your rent, but it was possible. So it was great fortune. It just happened to be a good time in my life to make that transition. I guess the other thing that really convinced me, I liked landscape architecture as a student, but the profession, boy, it left me really cold. And when I started calligraphy, I realized what I really initially enjoyed about landscape architecture was the design and the drawing and in a way sort of the craft of it. And calligraphy brought me back in touch with that. Whereas in graduate school in landscape architecture, all of a sudden we were doing research papers and I don't know. I thought, what happened somehow in the process? But otherwise, I was always surprised with calligraphy that at the end of each year, I still managed to make a living somehow. And it was getting a little bit better each year. And so it, in a way, it still continues that way. It's it's like, okay, just it was obviously something that one wasn't going to get rich at, but that never was something that that I actually thought very much about. It was just being able to do this thing that I like to do and finding a way to do it. Certainly after a certain period, the teaching and making things that were available for sale to students and things, the economics of it certainly got much better. And so there was some point when I think I realized, yes, I could survive at this. So the things I tried to do and I didn't like, I tried to do commercial work, and a lot of the people who were most successful, I think, as a business did commercial calligraphy. And I guess I always had a hard time working for somebody else. So I ended up choosing teaching primarily as a source of income because I was the only one I had to face up to. And that seemed to work for me. And then I think the only other thing I say about teaching, for me, it was always a way of continuing to learn rather than necessarily teaching. I don't know, teaching what I know. I guess that's part of it, but it was more for me, it was really an opportunity to continue to learn the craft, to learn the concepts, to learn the ideas. And as long as teaching provided me with that, I was quite enthusiastic as a teacher. So
thank you, Thomas. Sumner, you want to
Well, okay.
talk about your
Um,
your journey?
Yeah, well, after I graduated from Reed, I lived in San Francisco for a year. I went to one semester. I decided I would be a clinical psychologist. I went to school at San Francisco State, and after one semester, and it was this was in 67, 68 when I graduated from Reed College in 1967. And then I went for one semester to study psychology at San Francisco State. I decided that was not for me. And so I decided after I learned somehow, I think it was at the last class that I took from Lloyd Reynolds at Reed College. He showed a film which was made at Hallmark Cards of Herman Zapf. It showed Herman Zapf. I'm sure everybody has seen this film. It showed Herman making letters. It blew me away. I was completely impressed by this. I had obviously started doing calligraphy, and then I took the class, and so I applied to Hallmark for a job, and I wound up working there. And when Herman came as a consultant. So Herman would come into my cubicle and sit there and help me learn how to make letters. That was had quite a big impact on me to have that experience. And so then after I left Hallmark, I moved back to California, and I started immediately teaching, and I taught calligraphy. The first class I taught was in St. Helena, which is a little town in the Napa Valley where wine gets made. And one of my good friends who took the class was a fine printer who did a lot of work for the wineries of printing, both labels and all kinds of ephemera for these wineries. And that was my first experience at kind of like printing. I bought a press. I established a print shop. And so the whole commercial world of making letters and printing and so on to make money, to make a living. And then I started teaching very quickly. Within a year or two at San Francisco State, I taught calligraphy. And that was after I had taught this class of calligraphy in St. Helena. Anyway, that's the way I got started in whole calligraphy teaching. And then I taught at San Francisco State for many years. And I had really a good time that whole time. I really enjoyed the teaching. And I eventually went to graduate school, and I decided that I wasn't going to try to get a degree that had anything to do with calligraphy. I didn't think I could get a job. So I studied mathematics, and at the end of that time, there were three. I wound up trying. I went to Davis finally to get a PhD, and I learned the first semester that there were about 5 or 6 guys, and there might have been a woman, although in mathematics that doesn't happen very often, but there might have been. And nobody could get a job teaching math. They couldn't get a job. So I decided, oh yeah, maybe I better do something else. So I started doing this class in calligraphy at San Francisco State, and I started doing work for the wineries in the Napa Valley. I lived in Sonoma, near the town of Sonoma, Boys Hot Springs, a little town up in Sonoma County. And I did work for the wineries, and that's really what got me thinking, okay, maybe I should, do this for a profession. And so that's how I got started. And my first job was with a typesetting manufacturer in Southern California, Autologic. And they didn't have too many people who had master's degree in mathematics who wanted to be in their lettering department, and they hired me to be in charge of it. Which I did for about 4 years, and then finally I wound up at Adobe, being in charge of their type department, and lived in Palo Alto, and I lived there for quite a long time. 17 years I lived there. But I worked for Adobe for about 5 years, And then I went out on my own to design fonts, basically is what I did mostly. I did some teaching every year. I did teaching mostly in the South Bay, actually, which involved both lettering and calligraphy. So that's how I got started.
Great. Georgie, do you want to talk about your teaching?
Mm. Well, what can I say? I mean,
And how you got started? I know that your teaching was
asked
very,
Also read college.
yeah.
Lloyd Reynolds read
Yeah.
yeah,
college.
right. I mean, that's how I learned.
Uh-huh.
So that's how I taught. I mean, and
Yeah.
the yeah, I don't know how to describe the approach of of learning at Reed College, but I know that that the professor who taught calligraphy his approach was related to the way education was handled or thought of at Reed. So you would go back to the original sources. So that would mean studying calligraphy, you would be studying writing or inscriptions, actually, 2,000 years ago or whatever, and that's how he proceeded. And so since that, I was going, why was I at Reed? I forget. I think I started out majoring in sociology. It was I didn't know what sociology was, and then I ended up changing to art. But at that time, I don't know that you could study art at Reed. So I went to the museum.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think you could get it. Yeah, I don't think you
No.
could major in art at Reed. They didn't have any art teachers
No
except
art.
Lloyd. And
No
Lloyd was originally taught English there. When he
Yeah.
first taught at Reed, he taught English. And
Right.
he got going on this calligraphy thing. He started a print shop. There was a print shop in
Yes.
the building where you studied calligraphy, where there was a classroom. There was also, he had put together a letterpress printing shop, which
Yeah.
nobody ever used at that point. But that had been one of his interests. And he had many interests, and he was a fascinating lecturer. He was just spellbinding when he lectured, and he would almost always he would get up and demonstrate, and then he would talk. But he was a magical talker. He just was,
He
brilliant.
was. He embodied his affection and interest and passion for letters. He was like a living, moving, demonstration of it. So that was very convincing.
Yeah.
Impressionable kids, that's what we were. So
I remember when I went back to I think some anniversary at Reed. I think you did this, Georgiana. Had students of Lloyd's write a paragraph about why they, what Lloyd did for them, and these were all displayed in the
I have
outer room of the Commons. Do you remember that?
I
And
do.
that was fascinating to go through and read people's experience of why they, Lloyd had influenced them to do calligraphy.
Well, he was a very charismatic man, and very what would you say, charismatic, but also very approachable. He was a very personable and kind of, I mean, he had very high standards, but he also somehow conveyed friendliness or like it was okay for you to do it, And isn't that right, Sumner? I mean,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. I mean, you didn't feel like didn't have the right to do it or couldn't do it or anything. He was just he was a very approachable and I don't know, slightly absent-minded. He was kind of an example of an absent-minded professor, except that he was very smart, and he was very kind of determined that students would get it. You know, he was very invested. I would say very invested in, and somehow personal. Was somehow personal. I think that's what did it for me. Is I felt like somebody.
Yeah. I submit you. I mean, you after a while, well, you realize very quickly, watching him demonstrate and listening to him talk, that he was in certain ways a fanatic. You know, he was just he was devoted to the craft, and he knew what he was talking about, and he
Yeah.
stood in front of you and did it. And there
Yep.
was something about that, I think, that it just captured you. You know,
It was totally convincing.
It was magic.
You bought into it, and
Yeah.
a lot of that had to do with the kind of person that he was. You know, he
Yeah.
bought into it.
Yeah,
He wasn't teaching; he was
totally.
sharing. You know, it's very, very personal, and so that is a very convincing to a 18-year-old, 19-year-old. I mean, how many teachers have that, you know, I'm going to say expose themselves or reveal themselves or take that, occupy that psychological place with students? They don't.
Yeah.
So partially,
Yeah,
it's partially
right.
convincing because of that, because it's so personal. I have to say,
Yeah.
for me, I'm saying, because
Yeah.
I was very likely, very easily, you know, very willing to, or very likely to retreat, you know, if the
Yeah.
teacher expecting too much of me. So of course he expected your life. So then
Yeah.
you know, he was a very special person. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, I feel like we're very fortunate in those pioneers, because I know with Lloyd Reynolds, out of his teaching, so many of his students became teachers and emulated
Yeah.
him. And we're so fortunate that people like Donald Jackson decided that it would be wonderful to have this renaissance of calligraphy happening in the United States, and for him to, you know, for all these organizations to be spawns, you know, like New York and LA and San Francisco. So I think that we're very fortunate in the teachers and pioneers that encouraged us to have calligraphy as an art and not as just a hobby. So at this point, do you have anything else that you would like to add to these early encounters? And well, if not, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this beginning art form with us. I think that people will, the calligraphers now that are part of the current Friends of Calligraphy, will really appreciate your experiences, you know, starting in the 60s and 70s, and appreciate this history.
Well, I think I was very, I think Sumner and I were very fortunate to have Reynolds as a teacher, because he was a very special kind of teacher. I mean, he was completely devoted and completely, I'm going to say selfless, or it's like, I don't know. Sumner, what do you think? I mean, he was a very special person. And
Yeah, he was a very special person, and he was a magnificent teacher. He was just I mean, you know, so many people, so many people that he, you know, moved forward, and these poets, Gary Snyder was a student of his.
Yeah,
Um,
no, he
he
was a literary
had
man.
influence. Yeah, who was a very influential person in general, and he so he affected a lot of people in his role as a teacher, both at Reed College, but also at the Art Institute in Portland, where he taught classes there even after he stopped teaching at Reed for
Yeah, no,
several years.
any
And
teaching that he did was completely convincing. I mean, especially for a
yeah.
kid, you know. No, for
Well, I think one of the things about it was, when I was just thinking about it, talking about it, the fact that somebody could get up in front of you and actually do it. It's
yeah,
one thing to talk about stuff, it's another thing to actually do stuff. And there were no other artists at Reed College at that point. They started hiring people eventually, but watching him do it was magic. And it somehow affected you in a way that attending a lecture never could possibly do.
oh no,
did.
because he was embodying it. And
Yeah,
and I think
embodiment of what he was talking about.
yeah, and when you see somebody do something with their body, which when they're like 3 feet from you, you get a picture, you get a feeling for it. And it is, doing calligraphy is about feeling when it's got the juice. I think
Yeah,
it's got
Yeah.
juice in it, and it's because it's drawing. It's a form of drawing, and that is a embodiment of intention and feeling. And calligraphy is language, so like language that's unique to human beings, it's a big deal. And especially at Reed, it's a perfect art for Reed.
well-written language. And so you walked in to the Commons at Reed College as a freshman, and you were surrounded by, guess what? Posters that people had made on butcher paper, all beautiful calligraphy. Not
Yeah.
all of it was beautiful, but a lot of it was very good. And so you immediately were exposed to this phenomenon at Reed College, which was
Phenomenon is
calligraphy.
yeah.
Every meal, you went into the Commons, there
Yeah.
it was up all around you. And yeah, so that and that method of teaching, which was on butcher paper up in front of everybody, that's what I did. I'm sure that's what Georgiana did. It's like that was some sort of magical, part of the teaching.
Well, yes, I think so, because yeah, I mean, there's talking
It worked.
and there's doing teaching, so
Yeah.
so and then there's the teacher. I mean, that's another thing that is part of learning, or part of what engages you is the teacher, as well as what they're doing. Isn't that right? I think it is.
Yes, and I remember Lloyd saying at the end of the class, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Teach.
Oh. Oh.
Teach.
Well,
So-
I think that all of you did that very successfully, because I can speak from experience that all of you were very important to me in my journey of eventually becoming a teacher too, and teacher of adults and children. And
Well,
and so thank you.
as a student, you take it in,
Mhm.
but as a teacher, you got to put it out. So it goes
Yeah.
through you, and it is transformed by you.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so that's
It transforms you, is what happens.
yeah, that's right. Along the way, right? That's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
You are messed up. Well, it's such an amazing thing to have language, to be something that you can actually make with your hands, I think. It's a lot different than
Yeah.
reading.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a beautiful expression. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing this morning, and yeah, just deep appreciation for this gift that you've given to all of us with the Friends. And wonderful to see you 50 years later. And looking forward to seeing you in person, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Adios, muchachos, amigos.
Yes.